All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are calling in from. My name is Sarah Webb. I'm a Senior Technical Officer with the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to our webinar today, where we will explore the Contraceptive Social Marketing Report, looking both at the 2023 sales data and then also giving you a sense of what's to come with the report in the years ahead. Before we get started, we wanted to give everybody a quick orientation to our AI software, Wordly. Wordly is a simultaneous translation software that allows people to follow along to the webinar in multiple languages, where you can choose either closed captioning or you can do sound or like auto live sound to follow along. If you would like to use Wordly, you can go ahead and use the link that I just put in the chat, or you can access the Wordly app within Zoom if you have that installed. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar with accessing Wordly or any challenges, please feel free to message me directly and we will be able to help you out. And so to deliver our opening remarks today, I'm incredibly excited to introduce you to RHSC's Director, Martin Smith. Martin is the director of the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition, bringing 25 years of leadership in the sexual and reproductive health community, most recently with FP 2030, where he served as the interim executive director in the year leading up to the appointment of Dr. Samo Dube to that role. Prior to FP 2030, Martin was the country director for MSI Reproductive Choices in both India and Sierra Leone, as well as working previously with MSI. Martin, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. It's wonderful to be together, and we're very, very excited for this webinar that goes through the very important Contraceptive Social Marketing Statistics Report, which of course is a really respected community data resource. And we've been so very proud to take on the production and dissemination of this key report, building on the 30 years of work by DKT International, who of course are a valued member organization of RHSC. And this work, this report is very much in keeping, of course, with RHSC's long history of promoting data visibility and use within the community, the trust that the community places in us to produce those important data resources. And it's a great addition to the canon, if you like, of the suite of organizational resources that we have as RHSC in the data space. So throughout our vast network of members that span governments, that span private sector partners, manufacturers, of course, procurers, donor organizations, civil society, and advocacy organizations, the coalition really is well positioned to ensure that data platforms, tools, and resources that we produce are really responsive to the needs of our members and the community. We recognize the needs of the community are in constant flux as new products and stakeholders enter the equation, sometimes fundamentally changing the ecosystem. And so looking ahead, RHSC views a unique opportunity to ensure that the Contraceptive Social Marketing Statistics Report remains fit for purpose and provides the maximum value to members as an important data tool. And to do this, we really do need to make sure that we understand the ways in which this report is being used by our members and by the community at large. We want to know where you face challenges or difficulties. We want to know how you hope to see this report evolve in the future. And in keeping with our role as a membership organization, as part of this process, as we've developed this first report under RHSC, we really did seek feedback from the community and support from key partners in the last year. We had a series of user-informed design sessions through 2023, as well as a key engagement in our general membership meeting in Accra in October of last year that really did look at this key resource and how it needs to evolve. We have an advisory group that really does steer the evolution of this report. It's a multi-sectoral group of RHSC members who've come together to consider key questions such as the development of a long-term strategy and a set of priorities for the future vision of this report, That advisory group serves as a consultative body and makes recommendations around shifts in definition, scope and analysis for future reports. It will also make recommendations on further adjustments that are needed as we continue to produce this report going forward. So through these conversations with our community members, very many of whom are on the line with us today, we opted to keep this version, this year's report, pretty much in the status quo of previous year's reports that were produced by our colleagues at DKT. That's to allow comparisons to be made to the past and time to figure out, in partnership with our advisory group, how future iterations of this report should be set out. And we're indebted to that advisory group who've been fundamental to the planning and production of this year's report. So I think this report, as I was saying, further strengthens our collective understanding of the global RH supplies data landscape, where the gaps are, and we look forward to building on those learnings and building that back into strengthening and developing our data outputs, and looking forward to hearing from my colleague Julia White, Director of the VAN, in a few moments as to how this fits into RHSC's overall data approach and data strategy. But we can promise you that the next iteration of the CSM report that will be published in 2025 and will cover statistics of 2024, of course, will build further on the rich history and strong foundation that we've inherited from DKT and that our communities come to expect, as well as those continued improvements of coverage and insight. So we really do welcome your thoughts and your engagement in this webinar and thereafter, and really delighted to be together for the next 80 minutes or so. Back to you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin. Our second speaker today is Julia White. For those of you who don't know Julia, she is the director of the Global Family Planning, Visibility, and Analytics Network, or known more commonly as the VAN. Julia has 20 years of experience in designing, implementing, managing, and evaluating international public health projects, especially reproductive health projects. As the director of the VAN at RHSC, Julia is responsible for leading the Community VAN initiative, driving the vision and work to establish a virtual collaborative platform where community members access and use data collectively to make family planning supply chain decisions. Julia also serves as RHSC's thought leader and strategist on data for decision-making and identifies linkages with other RHSC and community-led investments and initiatives. And Julia, I will hand it over to you to talk about the CSM report within the context of RHSC's data strategy. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks, Martin, for the introductions. So, I'm excited because this transition of the CSM report this year has felt very natural and quite timely. And there are a few reasons for that I thought it would be helpful to talk through together today. So first, it really fits into our history, and this is something Martin was just talking about, the long history we have of promoting data visibility within the community by commissioning, producing, and disseminating really key data and reports, including things like the previous reproductive health interchange, the procurement planning and monitoring report, the FP market report, the commodity gap analysis, that's now the LEAP, and now things culminating onto the Visibility and Analytics Network, or the VAN. Second, it really fits into our work where we can leverage the convening we do and the working groups to figure out how best to integrate and link the data to other pieces of analyses and other community work that is taking place. So by hearing from our members, we can understand the data that you need, how you need to use it, and figure out where to prioritize efforts. And we look forward to really continuing to tap into that brain trust to continue responding to those needs, as Martin said, to take the CSM report forward into its new life and form. And third, this really fits into a future increased focus on data that is part of our new strategy in response to the community's growing appetite for data. So there's a growing drumbeat to bring together a lot of the siloed data sets across supply chain demographics, and financial analyses, and to bring them together for use, and where that's not possible, to really signpost what certain data and reports can be used for versus others. Considering how the CSM report and data sets fit into this conversation is a really crucial forward-looking step. And as such, it is part of our longer-term data strategy that we're going to roll out in our 10-year strategy that will be coming up this year. So currently, the current situation is that there are a relatively small number of data sources that underpin much of the analyses that the community relies on to understand supply and market dynamics. There are likely significant duplication in efforts across partners to make sense of this data, and then limited coordination increases potential confusion from conclusions drawn from similar yet different data inputs and approaches to analysis. Given these pain points and our track record as the community data steward, the community has identified data and analytics as their #1 intervention area for the coalition in the recent survey that we did. You all see us as able to offer a kind of community-wide neutral forum to align on data standards, governance, and use, while also promoting greater data visibility across the full portfolio of our RH products. And given our track record, the idea is that we can provide the community the needed leadership, coordination, and stewardship. You all also see us as more efficient in the sense that we already have a base, and so we can expand from this base to host and manage many new tools and data sources as they come. So recognizing this opportunity and the call to action that's coming from our members, we have been working to really clarify our role in the data space and set a data strategy. And rather than the duplication and confusion that currently exists, what we need is a flexible space to clean, standardize, and aggregate the database, the different bases of data for important forecasts and analysis. And I'm going to use an example here that I think we're all really familiar with, which comes in the form of financial and funding gap analyses. Many of us do these types of analyses to answer different questions. But if we could agree on the base data to use and then apply different assumptions and analyses, it would really help everyone to better understand the different answers and how they can relate to each other and have trust in the process. This is going to be really crucial across the global and country expanse to agree on the response to country funding gaps and what country ownership and domestic resource mobilization should look like. It may also help us to make the analyses simpler, so it's not only a handful of data experts who are able to play with the data, but rather more of the community at large and more of the membership. So at the core of our strategy is this vision. We'd like to be for you all the trusted data steward of quality, standardized, aggregated reproductive health supply-related data to drive and support decision-making for the community, ultimately in pursuit of greater access to quality, affordable reproductive health supplies. So we'll start by cleaning our own house, or our data, so to speak, so that it is more aligned and able to be aggregated. Working on the integration of the CSM data into the wider data sets we already manage is a really important first step in our data strategy. And we're looking forward to working with you all to continue to develop the utility of this data set, and this data strategy will be an important step with you all. So thanks so much, and back to you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. Before we move into our next speaker's presentation, we have a quick quiz for everybody on the line to get people thinking about the data and to highlight some of the discussions and trends that we'll talk about in a moment. So you should see in just a minute a little quiz pop up on your screen. The first question in this quiz is, which product category do you think had the most sales from reporting SMOs in 2023? The options are oral contraceptives, injectable contraceptives, condoms, or IUDs. We'll give everybody a minute to answer that. While people are answering, I'll move us on to our second question, which is which product has seen a continued increase in sales consistently since 2020? The options here are emergency contraception, oral contraceptives, misoprostol, and implants. And then our third and final question in our quiz is sales from which region generated the most CYPs in 2023? And the options are Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, East Asia and the Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, Middle East and North Africa, or Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm going to highlight quickly where people answered this question. I'm actually not going to give you the correct answer because those are scattered throughout Reina's presentation. But it looks like the most people that answered question 1 thought that condoms likely had the most sales from SMOs in 2023, followed by oral contraceptives. For our question around the product with continued increased sales, most people thought that emergency contraceptives had the increase in sales since 2020, followed by implants. And then in our final question, which region generated the most CYPs in 2023? The majority of people who answered said South Asia, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa. So I am going to end this poll and I will introduce our next speaker, Reina Jara Barrientos. Reina is a communications professional with experience in project management and event production. She has worked in the arts and culture sector for 10 years, managing a wide variety of events and different types of projects, ranging from planning to implementation, carrying out programming, communications, and administrative tasks, and building institutional alliances and partnerships. In 2022, Reina began working for PATH, supporting projects in market dynamics, primary healthcare, and reproductive health. And most recently, Reina has joined the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition, beginning with our FORALAC Regional Forum, leading our work in the Contraceptive Social Marketing Report, including the data collection and development of the publication, and also supporting RHSC's implementing mechanisms. And with that, Reina, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction and for that warm-up session. It was very, very cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Reina Jara, and as Sarah mentioned, I've been working with the RHSC since last year for supporting FORALAC, and then I got the amazing opportunity to work with Sarah, not just for the CSM report, but with some other very active work streams within the coalition. I'm very happy to be part of this incredible team. Now I'm gonna share with you some insights regarding the 2023 data and the development of the report. The timing for this year's report made us make the decision to keep most of it status quo, as Martin mentioned previously. However, there are 3 changes and additions we did for the 2023 version of the report that I'd like to highlight as a first step for an overview of this year's report. The first change was to include the USAID couple years of protection conversion factor, or CYP factor. This addition was made to provide users with an additional metric, which is also widely used within the community. This new conversion factor, we hope, will make the data widely more usable and comparable. And this was also included in the additional analysis that like sales or CYP trends, and it was also added to the historical dataset file for 2023. The second change is the removal of the 10,000 CYP threshold that was previously in place for SMOs to be included in the report. We gathered feedback from users and the wider community, first in the co-creation session that took place in Ghana last year in the GMM, and then in the different meetings with the advocacy group that Martin mentioned too during his opening remarks. And it all pointed out to having the sales as one of the most valuable assets for this report. And having this threshold for inclusion removed an important insight into a full market snapshot, and also created a barrier for small or independent SMOs, which were excluded from the report. And the third and final change is related to a split in some product categories. The previous versions of the CSM report included a combined oral contraceptive pill category, or OCP, and a combined intrauterine hormonal device, or IUD, category. However, a couple of challenges resulted from this classification. The first was that when using USAID CYPs, the two types of OCPs which are the combined oral contraceptives and progestin-only pills, they have different CYPs. So, and the same thing happened with the IUDs. They too have different CYPs conversion factors. The second challenge was that combining those two categories provided a limited insight at the market, as these product categories usually differs. And the third one was that, so it was decided to split both OCPs and CYPs into two categories, and that's the third change. And these all changes, for these changes, we welcome the feedback of the community, and we'd like to know if you have used the report and how you have used it, how it went with these changes. And I would like to throw a gentle reminder that we have a user survey up, and Sarah will add the link to the chat for you to, if you're interested in providing feedback. One of the questions is related to these changes that we have implemented for this year. So please make sure to send your input, and if you have already got a chance to look at the report, if not, please take a look at the report. So now please, next slide. For the data collection methods and the process itself, the data collection was a manual and straightforward process. We use the materials that DKT kindly handed to us, like the templates and the data sets from previous years. And here I would like to give a special thanks to DKT. They were very, very keen on answering all the questions that we had. And the schedule for this year report development was as you will see. Next, yes. We started with contacting all previously reporting SMOs to get the right person of contact for each one, and to ask them to suggest any other SMOs that we wanted to participate this year, and to let them know about the incoming data collection process. Next, we started the data collection process. We sent the template to each SMO, and then we also use the RHSC networks to connect with other potential SMOs that we want to report this year. Next, we started the gathering of the data within the single file during this data collection process, and we started data validation, sending the formatted data to each SMO for them to confirm we had everything correctly. And here I would like to remind you that all the data was self-reported and also self-validated. And finally, we next started the process of the CYPs calculation and the data analysis to finally start the writing and the design process. And the report was published on June 28th of this year. Next, please. Now, who reported? Now, let's have a look at who reported this year. And here are the regions covered by the report, where the SMOs and the programs within those SMOs and the countries covered by the report are located. And all of them are regions with low and middle income countries. And next, please. A quick comparison between 2022 and 2023 shows there is a slight difference between the number of reporting SMOs, of reporting programs, and the countries represented. We attribute this increase to the removal of the 10,000 threshold, CYPs threshold I mentioned before when speaking about the changes, although other factors that we're not considering could also be a reason for this little change. And now, before we go to the next slide, we're going to answer the first question Sarah asked previously, which is about the product that got the most sales this year. Next slide, please. And to all of you who responded that male condoms were the top sold category of products, you were correct, and congratulations. And I think almost all of you got it right. So you can see here the total sales for the most sold commodities of 2023. And as you can see, of course, condoms are way ahead in numbers of all the other products, and followed by combined oral contraceptives, which was the second option that most of people got, I believe. Then we have combined injectables, emergency contraception, and tablets of miso, which are within the same similar range of sales. And the last of the top 6 are the combined IUDs. And here are some things to keep in mind before we look at some graphs that I prepared with this year's data. The first one that I would like to say is historically, the CSM report has always focused on sales and CYPs as the main impact metric, but it never really tried to tell a story regarding fluctuations or external factors or trends. And that's how we did it this year. However, for future iterations, we are interested in hearing from the community and understanding what type of analysis will be of interest. And as a way to invite you to think about the different possibilities that can come from the data of the report, I want to walk you through some of the most sold products and show some trend lines over the last 4 years. But first, and going with what you're seeing in the screen, here are some initial thoughts about things to keep in mind that could paint a clearer picture of how the trends, of why the trends could be as we look at them. The first is the COVID-19 pandemic, which was definitely an external influence on things like contraceptive and abortion supplies, as the world practically stopped during those first 2 years. The second one, next please, are the fluctuations in donor funding, which support or subsidizes ESMO's operations and are as difficult to predict as the pandemic sometimes. The third is the number of organizations reporting, as it's not always the same number. So to get a better idea of how sensitive the trend lines is to each organization, there would need a deeper analysis would be needed. And the last one to consider is that from 2022 to 2023, the number of reporting of organizations was quite similar. However, between 2021 and 2022, there was a change from reporting organizations, and some organizations that held a large market share stopped reporting. So to start with the graphs. Next, please. Now, please keep in mind that the scale is a lot different from each product from one to another. So we could actually put one line below the other, under the other with these graphs, but it wouldn't work for a presentation. And here we have, first, we have condoms, which have maintained their numbers in the billions and that have suffered a little drop from previous years. And then we have the combined contraceptive pills that had a big drop from 2021 to 2022. And next, please. Then we have the combination injectables, and you can see there has been an uptrend in sales. And now we are going to get to answer the second question that Sarah asked in the warm-up session. Next is the emergency contraception, which is the correct answer for the question. So congrats to everyone that said emergency contraception. And they're both within the same scale of sales. They're almost like the only ones that are within the same scale. The last products, next please, that we have in the contraception category are the combined IUDs and also the combined implants. Next please, that as you can see, they have almost opposite trend lines. Finally, we have the trend lines for the top abortion supplies, and we can see the next please. There are misoprostol and the combi pack, and both of them, there was a drop in both of them from previous years. So after looking at these trend lines and the fluctuations, and although this was very fast for a thorough analysis, but this is kind of the point of this presentation, I would like to ask you, all of you, what you think are the types of things that could be influencing this besides what I mentioned before, or what would you be interested in knowing? So if you have Any thoughts on this? Maybe you can put it in the chat, and we can also, but you could also elaborate widely in the user survey that we have out for all of you. Okay, so next, please. Okay, so these graphs. These graphs right here are something that caught my attention, me as the person that navigated through all this data during the weeks and months that took the report. I had the opportunity to notice different details while collecting and organizing everything for the report. And one thing besides the sales was the number of social marketing organizations that reported each product category. So in this example, which is related to condoms and the 4 categories attached to it, which are condoms, free condoms, female condoms, and free female condoms, we can see that naturally the vast majority of reporting SMOs are for the male condom category, which also makes for the vast majority of sales. It's followed by female condoms, and both of them are pretty much maintaining a similar number of reporting SMOs throughout those 4 years. However, the number of SMOs reporting free or donated condoms shrunk to just a couple for the last 3 years. And I was wondering the reason behind it, if it's just a coincidence, or maybe some SMOs are not considering free product when reporting, or have the majority have just stopped providing free product. And those are just some questions that comes to mind, and maybe you have other questions regarding this information. So now to finalize, let's look at CYP trend lines by geography. Next, please. And the first thing to mention is that one of the main factors for trend lines to be high is the population density. And here we have the answer for the third question that Sarah asked at the beginning, which is South Asia is the region that generated the most CYPs in 2023. As the most populated country in the world, which is India, holds a huge portion of the sales. So here we can see there is a clear separation between the top 3 regions that produce CYPs from the bottom 3. And then this order remains when changing the CYP factor from historical to USAID, and thus eliminating the abortion supplies from the county. However, there is a clear drop in CYPs for the bottom 2 regions. CYP region, USAID, yeah. From the bottom 2 regions, if we take out the abortion supplies. And what does this tell us? One thing that occurred to me is that the greater market for abortion supplies could be in those 2 regions. However, and I'm inclined for this latter option, is that there are more SMOs working and reporting abortion supplies in those 2 regions, whereas in the rest of them, such products could still rely mostly on direct private sector sales. So after this quick brainstorm, I would like to take this opportunity to ask what types of analysis you will be interested in, what questions you have looking at these different trends, and what you would like the RHSC to investigate more thoroughly. And this is perfect timing to remind you again that we have a survey that is for all of you to provide your insights, and we have a special section related to analysis and anything that you would like to know and would like to explore in future editions of the report. And that is all on my side. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reina. And as we move into our panel discussion for today, I do want to encourage everybody, if there are questions, if there are things that are top of mind, you're more than welcome to provide some of those recommendations directly in the chat. I know we've had a couple of those come through. And then we do also have the Q&A question and answer feature enabled. So if you have specific questions, either for Reina or for Martin and Julia, or for our panelists that are about to present, please do feel free to put those questions directly into the Q&A box or into the chat, and we will have some time at the end to make sure that we get to those. So for the next part of the webinar, we are going to invite 3 of our advisory group members from the Contraceptive Social Marketing Report Advisory Group that Martin mentioned in the opening remarks. This group was convened to really help RHSC connect with the community and collect feedback from a variety of different organizations as we think about the ways that we might want to change the report in the future. And so the group has been meeting monthly for the past several months and will continue to meet monthly as we prepare for the next CSM report and implement the user-informed design roadmap that we will hear about in a little bit. So I am excited to welcome 3 of our advisory group members onto the line. First, we have Andrea Bare. Andrea is a senior technical advisor for the private sector with USAID's Bureau for Global Health in the Office of Population and Reproductive Health Service Delivery Improvement Division. Prior to joining USAID, Andrea was a senior advisor with the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan, where she worked with donors, implementing organizations, multilaterals, and other global and local health actors on market-based solutions to improve access to healthcare in low and middle-income countries. She also served as a program director with ThinkWell, focusing on health financing and private sector innovation. Andrea has extensive US and global healthcare consulting experience in supporting commercialization and managed care strategies for the biotechnology and pharmaceutical sectors. Welcome, Andrea. The second advisory group member that we have joining us today is Deniz Kayabas. Deniz is the global head of product and healthcare marketing at MSI Reproductive Choices and has over 12 years of experience in the consumer healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. She is leading the development of the global product portfolio, including next generation SRH innovations and go-to-market strategies, designing consumer-focused communication campaigns, and leading global teams and projects across EMEA, the US, and emerging markets in Asia and Africa. Prior to her position at MSI, Deniz was the global marketing manager for GSK Consumer Healthcare, leading global innovation developments for the gum health portfolio. Welcome, Deniz. And last but not least, we have Gibran Abidin. Gibran serves as the 3rd generation board member at PT Tunggal, a family-owned pharmaceutical company founded in 1970. The company is committed to producing reproductive healthcare drugs that meet international quality standards, including triclofem, a globally approved WHO pre-qualified certified 3-month injectable contraceptive exported to over 70 countries. Gibran graduated from HSBC's Global Executive Trainee Program and has nearly 8 years of experience in HSBC Retail Banking Group, most recently as a Senior Vice President. Welcome, Gibran. And before we get into the specific questions that we have today for our panelists, we wanted to provide a little bit of context and framing about what this group has been thinking about. And so several of my colleagues that spoke before me on the line today mentioned this user-informed design process that RHSC is undertaking in order to collect feedback from the community that will help us think through the ways in which we might change the report in the future. And in partnership with our advisory group, we have hosted a series of different conversations directly with some of the social marketing organizations, with different members across the reproductive health supplies community, and then directly with the advisory group to start to think about the main themes or issues that we might address. And so to frame this conversation a little bit, there are 5 different areas that we hope to look at and continue to collect feedback on in the year ahead. The first area is around data definitions. So really thinking about what definitions within the report need additional attention or additional clarity, where there may be some issues that are confusing to people who are reading and applying the report. The second area is around data automation. A lot of interest that we're hearing from people in automating the data process, both in terms of collecting the data from SMOs while they report, but also in being able to use data automation and applying and interpreting some of the sales data. The third issue area is around data granularity. As you saw from Raina's presentation, we did split out 2 of the product categories this year. So splitting out oral contraceptives into the COC and POPs, and then splitting out the IUDs into hormonal and non-hormonal. But there are some additional questions that people have around the appropriate level of data granularity and what would best serve the community. The next area is around report analyses. I think as you also saw in Reina's presentation, there's a lot of questions that come up about how we might compare or show trends over time, or trends between region, or trends by product. And so we're interested in hearing from the community what type of analysis would be most helpful, and what types of decisions are the community making with these data. And last but not least, the fifth area that we're looking at is data clarity and transparency. And so hearing some feedback from the community that additional transparency around calculations, around analyses, and around changes year over year might be beneficial. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen while we welcome our panelists on the line so that we can have a discussion about this user-informed design roadmap and some of the next steps. So again, welcome Andrea, Deniz, and Gibran. So Andrea, I'm going to direct this first question to you. And this question is drawing on your experience and perspective, kind of broadly speaking, but specifically occupying the role of a donor. How does the use of the CSM report contribute to informed decision-making? And what do you find most unique or most valuable about this report in your work?
All right. Thanks, Sarah. And hi, everyone. Great to be here. First of all, a big thanks, of course, to RHSC and the team for taking this on. And also a major kudos to DKT International for their whole spearheading of this and many years of producing this super important resource. So from a donor viewpoint, but also reflecting on the fact that I've been in other places at different points in my career, I think this really contributes to informed decision-making in multiple ways. At the core, of course, it's about the family planning product contributions in effect that social marketing organizations make, and clearly an essential role in many countries relative to providing the wide range of modern contraceptive methods. So from our viewpoint, contributing to the potential for informed choice and a wide method mix within voluntary family planning is incredibly important. And certainly to that extent, the CSM report has been a very reliable data source, even with its evolution and the fact that things do flux a little bit year to year for, a very large portion of the market, right? And I think it's fair to sort of loosely characterize it as the private sector market, although certainly that's an area that's always one of big reflection, depending upon whether the extent to which those products are free, fully subsidized, partially subsidized, et cetera. But certainly CSM covers USAID's priority countries, which is fantastic. And in terms of decision-making, so it's obviously funding and programming, but maybe the area that I'm as or more excited about is what it does for market and commercial development, because our goal really is to help countries evolve towards sustainability. And with that, one indicator of market maturity to an effect is the CSM report's annual and longitudinal sales data in terms of understanding how that evolves. So the trends in category volume, shifts in method mix, a lot of those things can signal opportunities for how to best meet consumer needs. And especially, as Julia noted aptly, in this realm of, very limited data. So the report is very instructive from both a country and stakeholder level for both market development and development programming. And then the last thing I would say is just that it also the trend data in it can guide planning for the phases of social marketing, which also comes to, I think, one of the challenges on the horizon is the fact that social marketing, progresses often from scale up to maturity and transition. So those phases apply at a product level as well as overall as markets evolve. 3 points that I find most unique and valuable. First, the private sector nature of the data. Second, the breadth of the products, the countries, and the organizations included. And finally, the longitudinal nature of the data. So with that, thanks, Sarah, and back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. Those are all great points. Deniz, I'll direct this next question to you. It's a very similar question to what I asked Andrea, but curious to hear from your perspective, particularly sitting within a social marketing organization. Is there anything that jumps out to you as being particularly valuable or unique about the report? And kind of how does that compare to what Andrea just described? Do you see that same value, or is there something else that you would call our attention to?
Thank you, Sarah. And first of all, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Deniz, somehow your mute turned back on. If you can, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. The technological age and the problems. So I would like to thank all of the contributors of the report and all the RHSC team. First of all, thank you very much. So from my perspective, in fact, I would like to start with having the data is the most valuable thing from my perspective. So I would like to explain it further why I'm saying that, because you mentioned about my background. I'm coming from the private sector where we have a bunch of data and everything is data-backed decisions. So it was kind of by default, you have the data in private industry and you just go and get it. It's that simple. So when I joined MSI last year, I was like, oh my God, it is an interesting, perfect industry with great opportunity. But I was like, but we don't have data. And then I realized we have CSM data. And that's what time, I think it was a time that I see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I realized it is not the same market. So you cannot compare social marketing perspective with private industry. And the first thing that we all need to do, I think, to learn how to unlearn and use the available resources. I think we have lots of data, but it is unstructured and quite in a complex way because we have multiple stakeholders and the definition of data is quite different from one stakeholder, the other stakeholder. So to me, CSM data is quite an important start point to having a valuable quality conversation with the global stakeholders, regional stakeholders, and local stakeholders. So I might say that. So it can give us a good direction to challenge ourselves in a very healthy way. So in that sense, having that data is really giving me a perfect, strong start point when it comes to having the conversation, because in social marketing, we have more like an entrepreneurial mindset. So you need to kind of listen your intuition, but use the data, but have lots of conversation with the stakeholders at different levels. So I think in that sense, like having the data and granularity at that about country level, the product classification at the moment for 30 years, that is great. So when it comes to, how we leverage this data in our day-to-day business and leading the social marketing organization and achieving our mission, I think the trend data is really valuable because part of my job is understanding the trends and finding the important gap areas in the countries that we are covering. So market development, expanding into new countries, new markets, and developing new products are quite critical. I think one of the key challenges of social marketing is that you need to be sustainable, but you don't have lots of resources and you don't have all the data. So you have lack of data, but this is where the creativity comes and you need to be really smart and mindful about using the resources. So looking at data and understanding the changes over the time, what new products entered the market, in what way, how did they perform, how our competitors are doing, the competitive intelligence, market analysis. These are really helping us a lot to understand the size of markets and also to really reevaluate and reassess our assumption when it comes to whether it is the right product to enter the market or whether we have the right business cases and assumptions in place to make sure that whatever product we are bringing in that specific country is really meet the demand of the consumer and it's going to be a success, because being efficient, being productive, it's part of our job. And that's why I think that data really help us a lot to lead the conversation in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deniz. A lot of interesting parallels, I think, between your remarks and Andrea's, and just the importance of data and making sure that we can use it for decision making around sort of where we're entering new markets, kind of from the SMO side, but also thinking about indicators of market health, indicators of how we're doing with that transition to sustainability from the donor side. So Gibran, I will also give you a similar question, kind of representing more of a private sector and pharmaceutical perspective. I'm curious to hear how you have found value in the report and if there's anything that jumps out to you as being particularly unique or important about the CSM report.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I will try to give perhaps my own unique perspective as a manufacturer and having come from the private sector. I think, first of all, looking at the report, what comes to mind is definitely a couple of things. One is market landscaping and opportunities. So to give maybe perhaps a practical example would be the report can be useful and giving assistance in, for example, giving an expected forecast in terms of growth or decline, in a particular product. This is extremely useful, for example, for a manufacturer who is supplying directly to the SMOs. That allows them to give some form of capacity planning for the coming year. So that's first. Secondly, what comes to mind is the report is also extremely useful in giving an indicative shift in method mix. Again, extremely useful for manufacturer within the RHSC ecosystem. So for example, earlier on in the presentations, the report stated, because I am a DMPA manufacturer, I can see that in 2023, there is 44 million vials shipped in last year. That's against, I can compare that to a volume of 34 million vials shipped in the previous year. That represents an increase of 29%, which means there's still growth potential there. You take it one step further, you see perhaps again, like earlier in the presentations, where some product categories has been split into subcategories within the IUDs and OCPs. That again also gives the opportunity for private sector to identify more market opportunities. Is it possible to expand your product portfolio in areas that can be considered, potential or growing? And then finally, for me, I'm going to give you a specific example in Indonesia where we're fortunate enough, if you combine it with other reports. So for example, in Indonesia, we're fortunate enough, the government released a regular report, which is called the Indonesian Demographic Health Survey Report. When you combine the CSM report with that, you can really have more of a clearer picture in terms of the split, between, completely private market, government tender, and also social marketing, So those are the practical examples that has been, extremely useful for me. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gibran. Another excellent perspective on how the report can be used for planning purposes, but from this side, really thinking about how manufacturers prepare to enter markets or to grow in markets, but also to meet the demand and needs of consumers within those markets. That's great. Thank you. Gibran, for this next question, I will start with you since you were last time. But in thinking about the year ahead and some of the potential changes that we've talked about with the report in terms of the 5 categories that we just walked through, also some of the discussions that we've had with the advisory group, what are you most excited about and why? And what current opportunities do you think might emerge from some of these changes?
So excited on opportunities. Obviously, I'd like to see perhaps, more trend lines being presented in the report going forward. So, I think at the moment, different users, they would have to kind of deduct their own user specific, trends, which are useful for them. And then also, another opportunity that I can identify is that, you can, in the future, hopefully you can see that, you can identify countries which are, for example, still subsidized by donor, or countries which are, already transitioning to a social business model, so that can really opens up opportunities, for example, for the private market, where there is investment opportunity there, or which areas to so-called perhaps attack in terms of if there's a significant unmet needs, that you can enter. So those were I'm most excited about. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gibran. Yeah, so some of that additional analysis that could really help kind of inform how the data is applied and used in decision making. That's great.
Yeah.
Deniz, I will turn this same question over to you, but curious to hear from your perspective if there's something that jumps out as being particularly exciting, or one opportunity that you're really looking forward to working on in the year ahead.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would like to say, having I think this mute issue is happening. So yeah.
No worries.
I was saying that I think, having appetite to change is the first exciting thing I would like to say, because we have been working on this for a couple of months and we are all agreed that we would like to change. And we already seen some of the changes in the current report, although the feel and look of the report stayed the same, but inclusion of further data, having more transparency for the smaller social marketing organizations, or trying to give some further granularity around to, different product types. I think these are the good sign of change. So from my point of view, from a social marketing organization point of view, what I would like to see, obviously, considering the 5 key area you mentioned, the data granularity in a further way would be quite helpful. So what I mean in that, for example, we have let's say we have the oral contraceptives, but we have combined oral contraceptives versus progestin only, but it would be really helpful to understand one level down, which I mean further details around the molecules that are used, because there's first generation, second, third, fourth generation oral contraceptive. So it's really helpful for us to understand the trends and produce the right product for the consumer. So that's one angle of it. On the other side, currently we have the volume data, but it will be really helpful to have an understanding and visibility around the pricing, so that we can really understand, while the market is growing in volume in one side, would it be also growing in the same way in value, so that we could be really in a better position to understand the trends and the opportunities and right thing to do in that specific market. So I think when it comes to the data optimization, so currently we have the PDF format. I think everybody would like to have more flexible, dynamic format where we can leverage our creativity in a better way. So bringing different filter dimensions together so that we can just work with the data in a different way and create more insights. So that's the second thing. And the third item, I would like to say integration of different data sets into this report. So that was one of the things that we discussed within our advisory group too. So all of the social marketing organizations or donors or different organizations, they have their own data, and we usually cross-check the data provided by CSM and create further input to be able to take actions. So I think it will be really interesting to find a way to kind of aggregate the data, combine them, and create further insight for the community. Obviously, keeping an eye on the data privacy and the borderlines in that process. Just an example, for example, in Nigeria, we use a CSM report for MA products to understand the safe abortion or unsafe abortion cases. But on the other side, we use our own data to kind of cross-check and to really resize the market. So we had the data and we had the opportunity to get a good understanding about the real size of the MA cases. So I think having that sort of data maybe available and visible for the further community would be also quite helpful and would help us to grow community in a more collective way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deniz. Yeah, so some additional kind of granularity and detail around the sales and prices themselves, but then also thinking, kind of building on what Gibran was saying, this ability to have a better way to analyze the data. So to pull different comparisons, to be able to look across different products or regions, and kind of build those reports on the user side. Great.
Maybe I can add one more point,
yeah.
because Gibran also mentioned about that, the social marketing organizations. So the social marketing business models are also evolving, and they are trying to be much more sustainable. The way that they define themselves or use the resources are also changing. I think having kind of a transparency about how it was before and how it is happening at the moment also can give us a better understanding about the changes in the market, and we can definitely allocate our resources in a better way to be more productive.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deniz. And last but not least, Andrea, the same question over to you, but kind of thinking about all these changes we've discussed, these different ideas, what excites you the most, and what opportunities do you see?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah and everyone. So building on what Gibran and Deniz said, first, I'm super excited, big picture, for RHSC to sort of be stepping into this role of stewarding this important data source and how it fits with all others that may come along, as Julia noted, because this report won't stand in isolation, right? But at the same time, there are limits, and kind of my big picture is like just excited about how with more visibility, engagement with more actors on this, how this can just generally support a total market approach, which is really thinking about what is the public sector doing, what's the pure private commercial sector doing, and what is the social marketing sector doing in individual countries. And I'm definitely excited about the sort of components of the definitions and the clarity and transparency and so on. I do actually see some challenges, though. I mean, a real positive is that I think the coalition is uniquely suited to facilitate bringing like together many different types of actors on this data and market intelligence path. At the same time, I think that, standardizing the definitions is going to be important. Making decisions about what level of granularity is meaningful and worth the cost of reporting and collecting. And this is where I think we do, frankly, get into a bit of the challenge space, because there is a reality of limited resources, right? And a multitude of stakeholder interests. And, thinking about the pure commercial sector, which Deniz and Gibran can both relate to, and I can from my history as well, is that in the private sector, often the actors are paying for the data, right? And there's more structure in place to collect data. And so there is that aspect. And so I think a challenge will be how the community comes together to understand that there are limits, because RHSC, has constrained resources like we all do, right? So that's just a reality. And so to that, I'm still excited about how this can be approached from kind of a stewarded fashion, and absolutely from this idea, a viewpoint of creativity and innovation and different actor types coming to the table with ways to go about it. And as Deniz mentioned, as social marketing business models and some of the organizations evolve, it's going to involve different things, because the competitive stance shifts and sometimes intensifies, right? And so how to address that? And might that be addressed through something like aggregation of certain types of data, or anonymity, right? Where there's some data that is super granular, as we can see it today, but other data that might become more at an aggregated level. I also think the observation that Gibran made about, intersecting like DHS data for a given country with something like the CSM data is something where there's a lot of opportunity also to just further the community's thinking on how to use the data, right? So that it's not a matter of like the CSM report producing everything that's needed. Again, because there's so many stakeholders, sometimes competitive interests, which is perfectly healthy and normal, and constrained resources. So that's what I'm excited about, is how the group and input from various users can really help along those lines, and working through that from a viewpoint of reality as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And thank you for the nod back to Julia's remarks as well. I think there's, this report certainly has a very critical role within a much broader data ecosystem. And so thinking about, what's unique to this report, how might we change this report specifically? And then also how might we, build on other data sources, help people understand how to pull those together, how to navigate them, and how to complete the picture is really helpful. But yeah, love the focus on definition alignment. Julia, I will also invite you quickly. I saw you come on camera. If there's anything that you wanted to add before we move into our final question for the panelists, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks so much, Andrea, for really summing up a lot of the opportunity and challenge. And I think, this conversation is putting the finger on what the coalition is being asked to and wants to wrestle with over the next 4 years in our specific program of action, but as part of our longer year 10-year strategy, is this idea that this report isn't going to do everything. We are using this data set and this report to open a broader conversation that, Andrea, you pointed to a lot of the opportunities and challenges. So this data set is very rich and is obviously being used as a very key decision-making data source, but in relation with lots of other data sources. So we've heard how partners are integrating it in their own different ways with demographic data, with different financial data, with data they can get their hands on. And this points to some of the current pain points we see in the community, which is this is being done repeatedly by lots of different people in duplicative ways, but in slightly different ways and in sort of private ways that people aren't willing to share. And so the big question mark to all of us is, what can be done one and done with certain base sets of data so people don't need to redo it multiple times? And some of those data sets are things that are already shared, like the CSM or like DHS data and different things. And so what are some of the base sets of data that can be set up for easy pulling, standardization, alignment for different types of analyses, but then in more policy constrained privacy settings are mixed with more of your granular data, more of your data that has to be used in a much more sensitive way? And how can that work? And how can we help the community to do that and minimize some of what we see as a lot of repetitive and duplicative pulling of the same data source for similar but slightly different uses? And that's what we're really hoping, the advisory group of this report is helpful with this data set, but we'd like to expand our remit and have a wider data conversation with the community to sort of look at this across different data sets and see how we can leverage technology and the convening of the groups to understand what are those base data sets and what could be done to streamline some of them. So thanks,
awesome.
Sarah.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thanks for the additional context and detail on our broader data strategy. We have one final question for our panelists before we move into more of a Q&A with everybody. I know there's a couple things coming up in the chat, and we're also eager to hear from other people on the line. So one last question, and Deniz, I will start this one with you. Is what is something that you think we need to do to engage wider perspectives across the community to ensure that they're included in this process, in the user-informed design process? And if you had a call to action or one action item that you think people on the line, whether they're partners, members of RHSC, people working in this space, what is kind of your call to action with them as it relates to that process?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to start with the call to action part maybe, because I feel like this is a great opportunity being part of this recreation process. So I believe it's the right time for all of us to kind of raise our voice and share our feedback, because this is an ongoing process in my opinion, and we would like to improve the report, the way we report the data and the way we collect the data. So, whenever we have a new report release, getting feedback from the stakeholders via, platforms or reaching out to us, like in some way. So it can be really helpful to improve the report in a continuous way. And I think another thing that I would like ask colleagues to be more sensitive about is maybe providing the data, because getting data from different social marketing organizations, it can help us to have better visibility and transparency regarding the data that we have. I think that would be one thing. And that sort of webinars and having focus group discussion, really bringing the community together to create a safe environment to discuss about all the issues, challenging and opportunities we discuss. I think that's great, because as Andrea mentioned a couple of minutes ago, there are maybe unspoken things or questions that we don't feel quite okay to ask, but I think that's the right platform to ask any kind of question, because it's going to be benefit of the community at the end. So I think that's important to make it clear to everyone and have an open, safe environment to grow together. I think that's what I can say as the last final point on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Deniz. That's great. Gibran, I will refer the same question over your way, but if you had kind of one call to action for people on the line, or one thing that you felt was very important for engaging additional perspectives in this process, what would that call to action be?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the arriving at the process itself has been a real joy for me throughout the past few months. The collaborative effort, I mean, despite the geographical distances, with the mural exercises, it's been a joy. If there's one takeaway for me, probably is trying to find a way to engage, especially government, in order to share more information, because they are a critical part, in this process. That way we can have a clearer picture in terms of what country-specific trends are. For example, like, is that specific country, what is the mix between private and public, or between, private and, completely donor. So I think by engaging a lot of the government stakeholder, we can have a more clear picture. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gibran. No, that's a great suggestion of a perspective or voice that we need to make sure is part of the process. And Andrea, last but not least, I will hand it over to you. What is your call to action or kind of ask of this group?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I would just say, and it's a little bit preaching to the choir, because these are the individuals who are on the webinar today, but, number one, engage and provide input, right? And I think that's where everyone who's on the call, who clearly is more invested, if they can reach across a few aisles and pull more people in, right, to the CSM report and this data conversation more generally, and to that effect, go local. So it's another aspect of what Gibran said with governments, but I would say go local also, i.e. wholesalers and distributors, and not that they're going to start reporting into this, but helping them see what's available and like what that might prompt for them. So that's one. Second, be forward thinking, right? And as there are various organizations and various individuals with a lot of talents on data automation and analytics. And I think the extent to which some organizations might share some of that with RHSC, that would be a fantastic consideration. And then finally, just kind of a repeat of what I said before, which is be practical, because this one report won't do it all.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, and a very helpful reminder. It is one report in a sea of data for reproductive health. So a good reminder. Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. We do have about 15 minutes left in the webinar. So I want to take some time to open up the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, whether that's for our three panelists who are still here on video, for Julia, for Martin, or for Reina, so any of us that spoke today, feel free to put some questions or thoughts in the Q&A box or in the chat. And while we wait for some of those to come in, I will elevate a couple that I saw kind of pop up in the chat throughout. So one of the comments from Kelly was an interest in seeing the misoprostol data by region. And so Kelly, if you access the report from the website, I'm going to answer this so everyone knows how to do that. If you access the report at the current link, there are downloadable data files that include the data basically from the beginning of the report, so the early 1990s all the way through to today. And you'll be able to kind of compare by region. It is a manual process right now, so it's something that can be done in that file, but that would require a little bit of kind of digging and comparing. And then I think that suggestion and idea is one that we'll certainly note for potential analysis or ways to kind of slice and dice the data for the future. I think, Jill, you had also put a kind of a similar comment about the new hormonal IUD category by country and region. That also kind of the same response there. So you'd be able to do that with the data file. One thing that I will flag is that for the new splits in the data, the comparison to historical data becomes a little complicated because we don't have historical data for those splits. And so you'll see in the historical data file itself, it will tell you kind of how that is coded in there. So how things were tracked up until the moment in time that they split out. So there's a little bit of a manual process that you would need to do there. But for 2023 itself, you would be able to see that data by country, and then you can aggregate that up to the regional level. And then the final question that was already in the chat that I will also elevate here was a question from Cindy. Have we considered asking SMOs to report whether their commodities and sales are procured commercially or donated? And so as Reina noted in the chat, this has been kind of a hot topic in the advisory group. Right now, there's a couple programs that reported donated sales or products that were donated, and those are actually marked in the report. So it'll say that the CYPs were further discounted for those specific programs, kind of based on a belief that donated products might generate fewer CYPs. And so you can actually see in the report itself which programs included some donated sales. It does not currently split that out by product, though. So you'll see, you know, if a given program had donations involved, that is noted. But the details of that donation versus the sales is not in there. But certainly something helpful for us to think about as one of the questions and asks moving forward is whether we capture kind of donations versus sold products versus subsidized products, and kind of how that would further complete a picture of a market snapshot. So a very helpful comment. Any other questions? Feel free to also put suggestions of things you would like us to look into. I will drop the survey link in here one more time. We are very, very keen to collect as much feedback as possible so that the report truly can be co-created with all of you and responsive to the needs of everybody who's feeding into this process. Any other questions?
And Sarah, sorry to break in here, but there were lots of tremendously good and important points raised by Deniz, Andrea, and Gibran. And you know, key one was you know, we have limited resource in our data sphere and within the CSM report, and we need to make some tough decisions about where we're gonna concentrate our efforts, and where perhaps it's nice to have but not completely fundamental. So it'll be lovely to see in the chat, or even for any colleagues to come off mute, you know, what some of those sort of need to have must do areas are in this sort of this sea of data of a constrained financial environment for analysis is. So would love to hear a few opinions there from colleagues on the line in the last few minutes. Or perhaps any further reflections from our panelists, or even yourself, Sarah, to get us kicked off would be fascinating.
Yeah, maybe I'll open that question first to our panelists. I don't know, Andrea, if you have any initial thoughts. I know you're going to have to leave us shortly, but if you have any thoughts before you drop off the line on that question, Andrea, I'd love to pass that to you quickly.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just going to hold on that because I want to give it some thought and not steer the conversation too much, Martin, but it's obviously something I'm thinking about. Yeah. Back to the group, and thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. Deniz, Gibran, any thoughts on Martin's question on how we may begin to prioritize some of these areas or things that are top of mind?
Yeah, I think for me, having more data granularity, that would come first. For example, when it comes to data automation or making the document more flexible, that could come later on. But to me, I would like to see more data because so that I can have fast and quality decisions. So if we can get that granularity in the first place, that would be the first thing for me. And the discussion that we had about donated product, subsidized product, normal commercially sold products, I think these are the critical things for us to get a better understanding about the current status of the market. So I would like to prioritize those versus the other more aesthetic kind of changes of the report. So we can work a little bit more when it comes to the manual part of the report, but I think having the data could give us enough opportunity and flexibility to move forward in the short term, I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deniz.
Of course.
Gibran, anything you would add there?
Yeah, I'd like to just quickly echo Deniz there in terms of data granularity. So for example, like an injectable, like some of the data available in the CSM report is amazing. For example, they provide, like moving trends between different type of injectable, between a 3 monthly, 2 monthly, and 1 monthly, so that on one hand, that's amazing, fantastic. On the other hand, if we could have something like, a breakdown in terms of distribution channels, in countries, that way, as a private sector, we can see how we can best serve or what is the best contact point, that we can supply, so to speak, in order to have access to products more readily accessible to CYPs. I think that would be my thought piece on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gibran. And to all those on the line, I know you are not able to come off of mute, but if any of you do have any thoughts or reactions to that question and kind of where some of these top priorities might sit, please do feel free to put those in the chat. We will certainly continue to monitor those. And as we wrap up, I will also drop my email as well as Reina's email into the chat as well, so that if people have additional thoughts or reflections that they want to send our way, they can do that. And we will put one more plug out there for the survey. We would love to hear from everybody in the survey, and just wanted to flag Julia's comments as well, that the survey, if you have broader questions floating around about data, please do feel free to send those to us in the CSM survey as well. We can certainly kind of elevate those to our team and to other team members who are working on our data landscape sort of more broadly. And so since we are coming up on the end of the webinar, I will transition into some of our closing remarks for today. Before I do that, want to give a special shout out to my colleague Ntinda Luembe. She was hoping to join us today, but is on some work travel and is not able to. And so I am going to deliver these remarks kind of on her behalf, but a special thank you to Ntinda for drafting these and preparing these for me. But as we wrap up for today's webinar, we would all really like to extend our gratitude to all of our speakers and to the advisory group overall, who has helped us get to this point and who has really shaped the process and the way that we're coming together around the CSM report. The contributions from all of our speakers have been incredibly insightful and valuable, both in understanding how the report is currently being used, some of the challenges in the way that people are currently accessing the report and opportunities to overcome those challenges, and really thinking through some of the ways in which this data can transform our decision-making and thinking about the future. I also want to reflect and acknowledge that this valuable resource would not be available without the input of various organizations and partners over the course of the past approximately 30 years, coming up on 30 years. We want to give a special thank you to DKT International, who held this report and developed it and came up with the idea and managed it for so many years, and for the trust that they have in RHSC for carrying this report forward. We also want to thank all of the social marketing organizations and partners that continue to share data and provide their feedback and recommendations as we continue to pull together the CSM report and think about the way that it could be improved or applied in the future. Looking forward, and to ensure that this report remains meaningful and aligns with the changing market dynamics, reflects market realities, and showcases the efforts and contributions of all parties involved, we do need your active involvement. The user-informed design process that we've discussed throughout this call and has been held over the past 18 months and will continue over the year ahead will inform the new RHSC strategy for this report, as well as other engagements that we have had across our implementing mechanisms, demonstrate our commitment to ensuring that public goods are produced, provide members with evidence, data, and tools to support your efforts in ensuring that communities can access and use the reproductive health supplies that they need when they need them. We are committed to being more inclusive, responsive, and proactive in addressing the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. It is your unique experiences, perspectives, and ideas that will accelerate progress into tools that enable us to turn our shared vision into more tangible outcomes. Therefore, I encourage you, both Ntinda and I encourage you to get involved. Your participation is critical to our collective success, and there are many ways to contribute, whether that's through feedback, by joining one of our working groups, or simply by staying engaged with our ongoing efforts. So the call to action that we would like to leave all of you with today is to take the survey, to download the report, to look through it, to see what you like, what you don't like, and what you might want to change, and to make sure that you send that feedback our way, whether that's through the survey, by email, or through a conversation. Thank you once again for your engagement today. Thank you to all of our speakers for their time today, and thank you to the advisory group for their continued support and shepherding of this process. And with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of their day, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you so much.